What is going on, sports fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to yet another episode of Fantasy Haus Live. Well, almost live. We have another set of weekly reviews coming at you, plus the updated power rankings, because there was actually a decent amount of shifting around in our top dogs this week. And finally, in our previews, we go over all of the action that's going to be in the upcoming week. We got a lot to get into, so you know what? Without too much further ado, let's get right into the action. Alright, starting nowhere else than with our weekly reviews. In our first matchup, Champ Cheese getting the upset over the number 1 ranked overall top dog in The-Cheetah Hill by a score of 146 to 125. In our next matchup, it's Destinoooooo, the number 3 overall top dog, continuing to gain some momentum as we get closer to the playoffs here with a win over the Deviants by a score of 166 to 105. Then in our third matchup, it's CeeDeez Nuts picking up the win over the Bajayjays by a narrow score of 110 to 106. In our third matchup, it's Bob's Burgers continuing to also pick up momentum as we get towards the playoffs with a score of 110 to 102 with a win over the Lame Tanks. And finally, last but not certainly least, Team Nugent, our number 2 overall top dog, getting the win over the last place Team Breeki by a score of 121 to 113. First, we are going to get into how these matchups broke down. And starting at the top of the list, we're going to start with The-Cheetah Hill and Champ Cheese. As always, starting at the top. Dak Prescott was able to get 17 points in the 8-point win over the Giants, while Kyler Murray was able to get 27 points in the 1-point loss to the Chargers. All right, continuing into the first set of running backs, we see Austin Eckler getting 25 points in the 1-point win over Arizona, while the first running back for Champ Cheese here in Dalvin Cook, only able to get 9.6, so it's definitely some lower production out of Dalvin, because, you know, he is the featured back there in Minnesota. You'd expect him to be able to put up bigger numbers. However, New England is a bit of a stout run defense, especially under Bill Belichick. They've always been good under him. They've been like pretty much a top 10 defense. Moving on into the next set of running backs, we have Travis Etienne for the Cheetah Hill, who actually went out early with injury, which is actually why I contributed to his less than 1 point. Then for Champ Cheese here, we have Saquon Barkley able to get 15 points in the loss to Dallas. Moving into the first set of wide receivers, which saw Tyreek Hill continuing to have an amazing season for Miami. I think I've said that pretty much every week now. He was able to get 15 points in the blowout win over Houston. Across the way, we saw Justin Jefferson pick up almost 30 points in the big win over New England. Moving into the wide receiver 2 matchups, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown pick up also almost able to pick up 30 points, my bad, in the loss to Buffalo. Did only pick up 27. Across the next wide receiver across from Amon-Ra St. Brown is Gabriel Davis, only able to get 7.8 points this game. He continues to be pretty streaky. Some games he goes off and is able to get a touchdown. He's been very touchdown dependent this season. Then moving into the tight ends, we have Dawson Knox, only able to muster up about 3 points despite winning over Detroit, while Dalton Schultz able to be the main benefactor, seeing 2 Dak Prescott touchdown passes for 19 points in that win over the Giants. Then moving into the flex position, it's Jalen. Look at me do my... That's not really a waddle. It's more like a shake, sorry. Lol. Able to get 13.5 points in the win over Houston. So both actually Jalen and Tyreek have been producing under Tyreek, who's actually also been one of the top QBs in the league. In the flex position for Champ Cheese, it's David Montgomery getting 14 points in the blowout loss to the Jets. In the battle of the defenses, we have the Miami Dolphins, who had a field day against a very terrible Houston team right now, able to get 20 points in that steamrolling. The Chiefs, on the other hand, actually able to handle business against the Rams, able to get 13 points, much needed in the 26-10 blowout win over the Rams. Then finally, in the kickers, it's Brett Maher for the Cheetah Hill, only able to get 3 points despite winning over the Giants, and Graham Gano able to get 11 despite losing to Dallas. Moving into our next matchup, in which case it's Destinoooooo picking up the win quite handily against the Chicago Deviants. And now, as always, we shall see how that broke down. Starting, as always, at the top, we have Lamar Jackson continuing to have a pretty decent season, despite the fact that the Ravens have struggled a little bit this season, getting 25 points in the surprise loss to Jacksonville. On the opposite side, we saw Patrick Mahomes continuing to actually produce quite phenomenally this season, picking up 21 points in the big win over the Rams. Then moving into the first set of running backs, Leonard Fournette did not actually play. I think he had an injury and was held out. So there's an unfortunate missubstitution by the Deviants. Across the way, it's Nick Chubb for Destinoooooo picking up 20 points and continuing to be one of the bright spots for that Cleveland team. Then in the running back twos, Miles Sanders had a phenomenal game against Green Bay, going off for 31 points in the 40-33 surprising kind of shootout. Then for Destinoooooo in the RB2 slot, Josh Jacobs also had a phenomenal game, career day, one might say, dropping 48 points in the 42-33 or 34 win over Seattle. Then in the wide receiver ones, Robert Woods only able to get 3 points in the loss to Cincinnati, while Adam Thielen only went off for 21 points in the big win over New England. Then in the wide receiver twos, George Pickens continuing to carve out a more continuous role there in Pittsburgh, able to get 10 points, while Darius Slayton for Destinoooooo only able to get about just under 10 at 9.3 in the loss to Dallas. Moving straight on into the tight ends. Hunter Henry able to get 15 points in the loss to Minnesota, while Travis Kelce, the future Hall of Fame tight end, perhaps even MVP candidate, getting 15 points in this game against the Rams. Then in the flex spot, it saw Michael Gallup able to get 11 points in the win over the Giants, while Brandon Ayuk for Destinoooooo also able to get 11 points in the shutout 13-0 win over New Orleans. Then moving into the defenses, we have the Patriots only able to get 1 point in the loss to Minnesota, while the Ravens in the loss to Jacksonville were able to actually get up 5 points. Then finally, for this matchup, we get into the kickers, where Tyler Bass for Deviants was able to get 10 points in the win over Detroit, while Harrison Butker for Destinoooooo able to get 14 big ones in the win over the Rams. And then, without too much further ado, we roll straight on to our third matchup, in which case CeeDeez Nuts was able to get a narrow win over the Bajayjays team, who is looking to start to string some wins together. And as we roll on into it with our QBs. So for Mr. CeeDeez, Tua went off for 18 points against a Houston team. Tua is having a phenomenal season. I know I touched on it a little bit before, but definitely in the MVP consideration. He's been the most accurate this season as well. Kirk Cousins for Bajayjays also actually had a phenomenal game against New England, getting the win, throwing up almost 25 points. Moving straight into the running backs, James Conner went off for about 21 points in the very narrow 1-point win over the Chargers, while Derrick Henry, the king, only able to get 14. I say only, but I mean that is actually still very, very good. Able to get 14 points in that loss to Cincinnati. Then, while we roll into the next set of running backs, Dameon Pierce, the rookie, I say this every week, the rookie sensation for Houston, only able to get 4 points this week, going against a stiff Miami defense that just had a field day. Across the way, you saw Kenneth Walker, who has been killing it for Seattle this season. I think Seattle has been everyone's surprise one of those surprise teams. I think after losing Russell Wilson, everyone thought that team was going to be kind of down for the count, and they proved just the opposite of that. Kenneth Walker being one of those bright spots that's really shined. Able to get 16 points this time, despite losing to Las Vegas. Then moving into the wide receiver 1 matchups, we have Mike Evans for CeeDeez Nuts, only able to get 5 points in the loss to the surprise loss. Well, I guess one would say that's a surprise loss to Cleveland. While Michael Pittman Jr. finally kind of starting to have a better second half of the season here. I know it was a bit of a rough ride. Early going, able to get 19 points in the loss to Pittsburgh. Moving into the next set of wide receivers, we have DeAndre Hopkins, who's been continuously building upon each week, looking like the undisputed number 1 there, being phenomenal. No matter who's been under QB, because I know Kyler's been out a few times as well. Able to get 18 points in the loss to the Chargers, while Cortland Sutton only able to get 13 points in the loss to Carolina. Then moving on into the tight ends, it's Tyler Conklin for CeeDeez, the Jets tight end, only able to get 8 points in the win over Chicago, while Greg Dulcich only able to get 3 points this week in the loss to Carolina. Then rolling straight on into the flex positions, we have another battle of running backs where it's Ramondre Stevenson, the sensational rookie running back for the New England Patriots, picking up 20 points in the loss to Minnesota, while Alvin Kamara, the elite number 1 there in New Orleans, only able to get 7 in the shutout loss to San Fran. Moving on into the defenses, the Eagles able to get 6 points in a shutout. Well, I wouldn't say shutout, but a almost kind of shootout situation with the Green Bay, while the Broncos were only able to get 2 points in a loss with Carolina. Then in our final matchup, we saw the kickers of Younghoe Koo for CeeDeez Nuts, able to get 8 points in the loss to Washington, while Cameron Dicker only was able to get 5 points for Arizona in the 1-point win. Our fourth matchup saw the Lame Tanks unfortunately taking another L this week against the Bob's Burgers, who have been pretty streaky, but looking to gain some momentum as they get towards the playoffs. As we look, Justin Herbert had himself a day, going off for 31 points in that very narrow win over Arizona. While on the opposite side, I think it was this. Josh Allen was everyone's early pick for MVP, able to get 32 points in that win over Detroit. Then if we move into the running back ones, Cordell Patterson, who started to work back from injury, only able to get 10 points this week, who has been kind of in a timeshare now with Tyler Allgeier. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, I really am. Then we get to JT, able to get 18 points in the loss to Pittsburgh. If we move into this next matchup of Detroit running backs, it saw Jamal Williams able to get 10.6 points over. While DeAndre Swift was also able to get 10 points, so actually pretty even, with Jamal Williams just ever so slightly getting the edge with a 0.3 difference. Then in the first set of wide receivers, we have Terry McLaurin able to get only 9 points in the win over Atlanta, while Amari Cooper continuing to produce, able to get 16 points in that big win over Tampa. Moving into the wide receiver twos, Drake London continues to struggle, unfortunately, in that Atlanta offense, getting less than 5 points this week in the loss to Washington, while Tyler Boyd, also producing low this week, only able to get 3.6 points in the win over Tennessee. Then, if we move into the tight ends, TJ Hawkinson was able to get 15 points in the win over New England, while George Kittle able to only get 5 points in the shutout win over New Orleans. Then, if we move into our flex spot, we see Chris Olave, the number 1 rookie, the rookie for the Saints here, able to get 11 points despite being shut out by the Niners, while Tyler Lockett able to get 15 points in that losing effort to the Raiders. Then sliding on into these defenses here, once again, the Saints taking the L. Unfortunately, they actually, in that losing effort, they were able to get 4 points, while the Packers did not do so well, losing actually 5 points going against Philly as they took the L. Then lastly, we have the Battle of the Kickers, where Justin Tucker almost was able to nail a game winner from super far out. I think it was like 67 or something like that. Was able to get 14 points despite missing that in the loss to Jacksonville, while Matt Gay was only able to get 5 points in the loss to Kansas City. Then lastly, in our last matchup of the week, Team Nugent able to pick up the win against a struggling Team Breeki team, and we'll show you how that broke down. Starting at the top, Jalen Hurts had himself a day. Like I said, it was a bit of a shootout with the Green Bay and Philadelphia game, with Jalen able to get 31 points in that win, while across the way Tom Brady for Team Nugent only able to get 20 points in that loss to Cleveland. Moving straight into the running backs, the Rams are kind of in shambles right now. Cam Akers, I guess, just making opportunities. Same thing with Allen Robinson, if he hasn't been injured. But anyways, Cam Akers was able to get 3.7 points, while across the way Christian McCaffrey able to only get 8.9 points in that shutout win over New Orleans. Then moving into the RB2s, we saw Aaron Jones go off for 18 points in the loss to Philadelphia, while Tony Pollard was able to only get 8 points this week in the win over the Giants. Then in the matchup of wide receivers, we saw Stephon Diggs go off for 21 points this week in the big, narrow win over Detroit, while CeeDee Lamb able to get a pretty modest 17 points this week in the 28-20 victory over the Giants. Then moving into the wide receiver twos, we saw Devontae Adams get 14 points in the I guess I wouldn't say blowout win, but 6-point win over Seattle, while AJ Brown was also able to produce a pretty modest 12 points in the win over Green Bay. Then moving straight into the tight ends, we saw Pat Freiermuth of Pittsburgh able to get 6.9 points in the win over Indy, while Mark Andrews for Baltimore only able to get was able to get 11 points in the loss to Jacksonville. Then in the flex spot, Allen Robinson looks like did not play or did not catch anything, while T. Higgins was able to go off for a bit of a day, able to go off for 24 in the win over Tennessee. Then if we move straight on into the defenses, the Bills defense able to get 8 points in the narrow win over Detroit, while Dallas able to only get 3 points in the 8-point win over the Giants. Then lastly, we have Daniel Carlson getting 9 points in the win over Seattle, while Nick Folk was able to have himself a day, get 15 points despite losing to Minnesota. Now, which brings us to our next section, which is the power rankings. And like I said, there was quite a lot of shifting around this week. And new number 1 overall top dog, Destinoooooo. You know it, you love it. He's been fighting all season, pretty much just lurking in that 3rd overall top dog, going from 3rd to 1st this week with a record of 8-4. Then we have The-Cheetah Hill dropping down with a loss this week, dropping down to number 2 spot out of that 1 overall top dog, and same thing with Team Nugent, also dropping down 1 spot to the number 3 spot. So Destinoooooo moving into number 1, The-Cheetah Hill sliding down into the 2nd spot, then Team Nugent sliding down into the 3rd spot. Moving into the middle of the pack, it saw Bob's Burgers holding down the 4th spot. All 3, I should mention before we get too far out of here, that all 3 of our top dogs have the exact same record. So it's technically a 3-way tie for 1st with a record of 8-4. Moving into the, like I said, middle of the pack with Bob's Burgers, who actually has been holding it down for a couple of weeks now, improves his record to 7-5, while there becomes another 3-way tie for 5th, 6th, and 7th between CeeDeez Nuts, Champ Cheese, and the Deviants, with currently CeeDeez Nuts being in 5th, up to 5th spot, Champ Cheese also up to that 6th spot, and the Deviants have been, with a loss, fell this week to the 7th spot, and those 3 teams with a 6-6 record. Then in 8th spot that didn't move was the Bajayjays with 4-6. In the 9th spot, the Lame Tanks remain. There was no movement with their dumpster fires, with Lame Tanks remaining at 9 with a record of 4-8, and Team Breeki bringing up the rear with a record of 3-9. Lastly, this brings us to our preview for the next week. Voila! Here it is. So if we take a look in our first matchup of week 13, the new number 1 overall top dog, Destinoooooo, looks to continue and hold that number 1 top spot against a champ cheese team that has been fighting as of late. Then in matchup number 2, we see The-Cheetah Hill, the number 2 overall top dog, looking to continue some momentum here against a surging Bob's Burgers team. In our third matchup of the week, we see Team Nugent, our 3rd overall top dog, looking to go head-to-head against CeeDeez Nuts, who's looking to make some position and make a statement right before the playoffs before the playoffs get underway here. Then in our 4th matchup, we have the Lame Tanks taking on the Bajayjays, both teams kind of struggling here. And then lastly, you have the Battle of the Brothers again, Chicago Deviants taking on the last place Team Breeki. And now we should take a look at how that first matchup kind of looking out as of right now. So here we go. Starting at the top, we have Patrick Mahomes and KC taking on Cincinnati versus Jimmy G and San Fran versus Miami. Is this really a question? You got to go with Mahomes here. There are reports that this is supposed to be more of a shootout game with Jimmy G here and the Niners in Miami, but still, Mahomes has just been producing, and he's definitely in the MVP talks for sure. So having said that, you definitely got to go against Cincinnati. Despite the fact Cincinnati's been playing a little bit better, I still think you got to go with the MVP candidate. Moving into the first round of running backs, we have Nick Chubb in Cleveland going against Houston versus Dalvin Cook in Minnesota going against the Jets. Oof. You got to go with Nick Chubb on this one. That Houston is just the team to pick on, one of the teams to pick on this year. Without a doubt, Nick Chubb on this one. Moving into the running backs, we have Josh Jacobs, assuming he plays against the Chargers, and Saquon going against Washington. Josh Jacobs did go off last week, and he seems to be pretty much one of the lone bright spots apart from Devontae. And unfortunately, I would say Saquon, but I mean, Washington is actually pretty good against the run. Saquon was actually stuffed last week, and they were going against Dallas, and I know Dallas is also a different and better defense, but still, I think I'm gonna have to roll with Josh Jacobs on this one. I think he actually might end up. He had a phenomenal week last week. I think he might be able to put not the same like career day, but I still think we have a solid outing. Moving into the wide receiver 1 matchup, we have a battle of Minnesota wide receivers, in which case Adam Thielen and Minnesota take on the Jets versus Justin Jefferson. If you think about it, the Jets have been playing very good defense this year. Their number 1 receiver or number 1 corner, I believe, is Sauce Gardner, who you would think is going to be covering Justin Jefferson. Or Justin Jefferson just goes Randy Moss mode, or he gets covered. That could open up the way for Thielen. But I think Justin Jefferson will continue to produce after putting up 30 points, almost 30 points last week. Moving into wide receiver 2s, we have Darius Slayton and the Giants taking on Washington versus Christian Watson and Green Bay taking on Chicago. I'm not trying to toot on my own horn here or vote for my guys, but Christian Watson has been a touchdown machine as of late, both with Rodgers and Jordan Love under center. Pretty much almost every time he's touched the ball, it's been going in for a touchdown. And there's been word that Rodgers wants to play this weekend, and especially since it's against Chicago. He's always historically done very good against them. So I'm gonna say Christian Watson's gonna have the better stat line against a Washington or Giants team that is gonna be going against Washington. That NFC East is actually very good this year. So I think that's gonna be a little bit more of a stifled matchup. Then in the battle of tight ends, you got Travis Kelce and the Chiefs taking on Cincy versus Dalton Schultz, and the Cowboys going against Indianapolis. I mean, you got to go with Travis Kelce. Doesn't matter who the team is. He's a future Hall of Famer for a reason. Got to go Travis Kelce. Moving to the flex, you got Brandon Ayuk and San Fran taking on Miami versus David Montgomery and Chicago taking David Montgomery and the Bears taking on Green Bay. Well, if Debo does miss any time for being injured, then Ayuk will definitely see an uptick in snaps. But on the other hand, David Montgomery's definitely solidified his role as the number one, I believe, there in Chicago. And Green Bay has also been pretty soft against the run. So I think David Montgomery might actually have the better day here. Then in the defenses, we have the Ravens and Baltimore going against Denver versus the Seahawks going against the Rams. This one is actually going to be pretty close because the Ravens have a pretty good defense. Denver not playing so hot. Same thing could be said for Seattle, a defense that is actually playing very good right now against a pretty much scrambling and fumbling Rams team. So this would probably have to be my first push in a while, but I think these teams will probably put up similar stat lines. Then in the kicker spot, we have Harrison Butker and the Chiefs taking on Cincy versus Graham Gano and the Giants taking on Washington. I think Graham Gano might be in line for another big day, especially if they can't finish those drives. But who knows, that Washington defense could actually stop them. So it'll be interesting. Moving on into our next score update. Or not score update, our preview. We have The-Cheetah Hill and Bob's Burgers. As always, we start with our QBs. We have Dak Prescott and Dallas taking on Indianapolis versus Justin Herbert and the Chargers taking on Las Vegas. Gonna have to roll. This one might be close. I know Indy isn't the greatest of defenses. They're pretty middle of the pack, but Justin Herbert has been playing phenomenal, and they are going against Las Vegas, who did give up a lot of points to Geno and the Seahawks. So I think I'm going to roll Justin Herbert on this one. Then moving into the battle of running backs, we have Austin Eckler and the Chargers taking on Las Vegas versus Cordell Patterson, Atlanta, taking on Pittsburgh. Got to roll with the muscle hamster and Austin Eckler. I think he's just been producing very well over the season, having a spectacular season. Cordell Patterson just returning from injury and, like I mentioned earlier, kind of in a split timeshare at the moment. Then in the running back 2 spot, we have Travis Etienne in Jacksonville taking on Detroit versus Jamal Williams in Detroit taking on Jacksonville. So we actually have 2 backs that will go against each other, assuming Etienne will play. This one will be kind of tough. If Etienne is 100% healthy, I think Etienne might have the better day. Jacksonville seems to be kind of starting to put things together, and that Detroit team is just they can put up points, but unfortunately their defense just is bad, and they also give away the ball. Then in our wide receiver 1 matchups, we have Tyreek in Miami going against San Francisco versus Terry McLaurin in Washington going against the Giants. Got to go with Tyreek. Can't go against him. He's been producing no matter the team and no matter the quarterback, so roll with the guy. Moving into wide receiver 2s, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown in Detroit taking on Jacksonville versus Drake London in Atlanta versus Pittsburgh. Drake London, part of that, you would think that he would be more of a focal point of that offense with all of the injuries that they have to Cordell Patterson and Kyle Pitts, but really hasn't really done too much. Amon-Ra St. Brown, though, on the other hand, spectacular number 1 wide receiver there for Detroit, especially with a juicy matchup against a up-and-coming Jacksonville team. I think we got to roll with Amon-Ra on this one. Moving into the tight end spot, we got Dawson Knox and Buffalo taking on New England versus T.J. Hawkinson and Minnesota going against the Jets. I think Hawkinson will be more involved against the Jets than Knox will be against New England. And also, historically, Belichick's been pretty stingy against tight ends. In the flex spot, Jalen Waddle against San Fran versus Chris Olave. And the Saints going against Tampa Bay. I think Jalen Waddle's going to have a good day. I think It's going to be a shootout with San Fran and Minnesota. So I think just like Tyreek has been kind of benefiting, so is Jalen Waddle, who has also been having a fantastic season. So I think he's just going to receive the ball no matter what, kind of like Tyreek. Moving into the defenses, we have Dolphins at Miami taking on San Fran, like I've said a lot, versus the Saints taking on Tampa. Oof. Probably this. I wouldn't really want to take any of these defenses, but I guess Miami, because I don't think the Saints defense is going to be able to do too much. Then in the battle of the kickers, we have Brett Maher and Dallas taking on Indy versus Justin Tucker and Baltimore going against Denver. You can't go against Justin Tucker. The man just pretty much has an insane range. He almost nailed it from 67 out. So I would expect that if drives stall with Tucker, he'll be able to, kick it home for him. Then in our third matchup, we have Team Nugent against Mr. CeeDeez Nuts. So, starting off, Tua Tagovailoa on Miami going against San Fran versus Tom Brady, and Tampa Bay going against New Orleans. I think Tua's going to have more numbers here. Tampa Bay has just been on and off injured. Things haven't always been cooking, but seems like Tua's got everything figured out when he's obviously healthy. So I think Tua's gonna have the better week. Moving into the RB1s, we have Dameon Pierce in Houston going against Cleveland versus Christian McCaffrey and San Fran going against Minnesota, or going against Miami. If Christian McCaffrey plays, that could be. I think you would have to give it to him. Otherwise, Houston. I know Dameon Pierce is pretty much like their like bright spot, but I think he might have some issues going against Cleveland. Moving into the next set of running backs, we have Ramondre Stevenson in New England going against Buffalo versus Tony Pollard in Dallas going against Indianapolis. Oof. Probably, I think Tony Pollard will have the better day. I think the New England and Buffalo game is going to be pretty tight. Moving into wide receiver ones, we have Mike Evans in Tampa going against New Orleans versus CD in Indy. I think Mike Evans is going to have, assuming he's healthy and can play, I think Mike Evans will have the better stat line against a weakened New Orleans team. Then in the wide receiver 2 matchup, we have Garrett Wilson and the Jets taking on Minnesota versus AJ Brown and Philly taking on Tennessee. Well, I think AJ Brown, because one, it's going to be a revenge game for him. 2, Tennessee is pretty mediocre this year, while Minnesota's defense is actually pretty good. I know. And Mike White is going to be under center for the Jets, so that'll be something different, but I still think AJ Brown will produce better. In the tight end spot, you have Tyler Conklin for the Jets going against Minnesota versus Mark Andrews and Baltimore going against Denver. I think Denver. I think Mark Andrews is going to have the better stat line this week, as he's just been, one of Lamar's favorite targets, assuming he can hold on to the ball. Moving into the flex spot, we have Joe Mixon in Cincy taking on KC versus T. Higgins and Cincy taking on KC. So similar. I think Joe Mixon will have the better day here. I did read that online that he was gonna play, so I think. Having said that, he'll probably have the better stat line unless they split targets with P. Ryan. Then that could also happen. Moving into the Eagles or defenses. We have the Eagles and Philly taking on Tennessee versus the Cowboys and Dallas taking on Indianapolis. I think the Cowboys are going to force a lot of turnovers and get a lot of sacks, so I think Cowboys are going to have the better week. Then in the kicker matchup, we have Younghoe Koo going against Pittsburgh versus Nick Folk and the Patriots going against Buffalo. I think Younghoe Koo actually might have more stalled chances that he's able to make against Pitt. Next, we have the Bajayjays and Lame Tanks. All right, taking a look at how this broke down. We saw, not taking a look at how this broke down. We're going to look at how this is shaping up. Kirk Cousins in Minnesota taking on a stingy but surging Jets defense, while Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills take on New England. Ooh, this is going to be a good matchup. I think Kirk Cousins is going to figure out his way against the Jets here and have a game. While Josh Allen, even though he started the season off hot, I think he's been kind of. I think the team as a whole has been kind of cooling off. So I think I'll probably eat my words on this one, but I think Kirk Cousins will have the better day. Moving into the wide receivers, running back twos, we have Derrick Henry, the King, going against Philly versus JT, and Indy going against Dallas. Oof, these are not ideal defenses for either to go against, but I could see Derrick Henry having the better day as both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon were able to be somewhat effective against them last week. JT, I could just see that entire Indy defense getting smothered by that Dallas defense, so I bet King Henry's going to have the better day. Then moving into the running back twos, we have Kenneth Walker in Seattle taking on the Rams versus DeAndre Swift in Detroit taking on Jacksonville. Got to roll with Kenneth Walker on this one. The Rams are pretty much in shambles, and I think they're going to shut down Aaron Donald for the year, so that's going to leave a massive hole there for those offensive linemen to eat. Then, moving into wide receiver ones, we have Michael Pittman Jr. in Indy going against Dallas versus Amari Cooper in Cleveland going against Houston. Oof, gotta go with Amari Cooper. He's been stellar as of late, not really mattering who is under center. Then moving into the next set of wide receivers, we have Courtland Sutton in Denver taking on Baltimore versus Tyler Lockett in Seattle going against the Rams. Again, got to pick on the Rams here again. Got to go with Tyler Lockett. I would figure Jalen Ramsey is probably going to, if he does shadow, would probably shadow DK, but could be wrong. Then in the battle of tight ends, we have Greg Dulcich and for Denver going against Baltimore versus George Kittle and San Fran for Miami. I think George Kittle will have the better stat line. It's going to be supposedly it's supposed to be a shootout with Miami. I would be shocked if Kittle wasn't able to contribute to some extent, while Dulcich, I think it's more of just kind of like a product of that offense that just hasn't been very good. Moving into the flex spots, we have Alvin Kamara, New Orleans going against Tampa Bay versus Devin Singletary and Buffalo going against New Orleans. Again, these are not ideal defenses to be going against. Alvin Kamara technically carrying that injury designation, but against a strong Tampa Bay defensive front too. I think probably go with Kamara on this one. Moving into the defenses, we have the Broncos and Denver going against Baltimore versus the Packers and Green Bay going against Chicago. Chicago's pretty depleted right now, well, at least on offense. So maybe the Packers, but I could totally see them scoring like pretty mediocre. Then for kickers, we have Cameron Dicker and the Chargers going against Las Vegas versus Matt Gay and the Rams taking on Seattle. Gotta go with Matt Gay on this one. Especially if there's like, well, actually no, I take that back. Gotta go with Cameron Dicker on this one, assuming he is the starting kicker there. And I think there might be some times when they stall out runs there, or stall out drives, and he'll be able to be set up for some opportunities. All right, and this brings us to our last preview, in which case we see Chicago Deviants taking on Team Breeki. Starting at the top, we have Lamar Jackson and Baltimore taking on Denver versus Jalen Hurts and Philly taking on Tennessee. I would love to say Lamar, but I think Jalen and the Eagles are just rolling. Jalen's been looking phenomenal. I think they're going to steamroll Tennessee here. Moving into RB1s, we have Leonard Fournette in Tampa going against New Orleans versus Cam Akers and the Rams going against Seattle. I'm going to have to roll with Fournette, assuming he returns from injury and is able to play. While Cam Akers is still kind of just, I don't even think he's really the lead back there yet. Anyways, moving into RB2s, we have Miles Sanders in Philly going against Tennessee versus Aaron Jones in Green Bay going against Chicago. Got to go with Aaron Jones on this one. Just historically, the team has played very well against Chicago, and Chicago has also been a bit weakened this year, having traded off some of their pieces on defense. Then In the wide receiver matchups, we have Robert Woods in Tennessee going against Philadelphia versus Stephon Diggs in Buffalo going against New Orleans. Gotta go. I guess you gotta go with Stephon Diggs. He's a number one wide receiver. Being a beast doesn't, trying to show why he is the undisputed number one wide receiver in the league. Then moving into wide receiver twos, we have George Pickens in Pittsburgh going against Atlanta versus Devontae Adams in Las Vegas going against the Chargers. I think I would have to say probably Tay on this one. Not trying to be favoritism, but I just think that the amount of amount of high point games that he's had is far more greater than the ones that George Pickens has, despite the fact that Pickens has been consistent. Moving into tight ends, we have Hunter Henry and New England taking on Buffalo versus Pat Freiermuth and Pittsburgh taking on Atlanta. Ooh, I think Pat Freiermuth might have the better day because he can be, provide cover for the, or not provide cover, be that safety blanket for the QB. Then moving into the flex spot, partially we have Michael Gallup, who's questionable, but Dallas takes on Indy versus Allen Robinson, who's on IR, so this has got to go to Michael Gallup. Moving into the Bills, we have the Rams taking on Seattle versus the Bills taking on New England. I think the Bills defense will probably have a narrowly better time, or better point margin. Then finally, in our kicker matchup, we have Tyler Bass and Buffalo taking on New England versus Daniel Carlson and Vegas taking on the Chargers. I think Tyler Bass might have the better stat line for that one. I just want to thank you guys once again for tuning in and hanging out for yet another installment of this Fantasy Haus Live. As per usual, we covered the review of the week. We went over the updated power rankings, in which case there was a lot of shifting around with our top dogs. And lastly, we went into a preview of the next week. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe at the bottom of the video as per usual. Other than that, I will see you sports fans in the next video. As always, peace out, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!